In this video I'm going to show how to install the OpenGD77 firmware onto a TYT MD2017 which is also sold by Retevis as an RT-82 and also by some other rebranding companies. The radio is currently running the official firmware and I've connected the USB cable ready to install the firmware. Now on these radios, to enter firmware update mode you need to turn off the radio, wait for it to power down. You then need to hold the PTT button on the left, which on this TYT MD2017 is a blue one, and on the other radios I think that's called orange, but anyway the PTT. So you hold the PTT and also the button on the top, which on this one is coloured orange. I'm not sure if they're coloured orange on all the variants. There do seem to be some differences between these radios. Now I'm firmly pressing both of those in and turn the radio on. Now if it just runs the official firmware again, then probably you've not pushed the buttons down hard enough, because the button on the top is known to be kind of fairly fragile or not very sensitive, so some people reported that that button generally doesn't work very well. If that button's broken internally, then there's just unfortunately no way you can update the firmware on this radio at all without maybe taking it apart and fixing that first. Anyway, so the radio is now in firmware update mode, and you can tell that because the LED on the top will be flashing red and green. Now it's in firmware update mode. I'm just going to make this this picture a bit smaller of the radio, and the next thing we need to do is check whether whether Windows has loaded the device driver to update the firmware. Now if you run the Windows Device Manager and look under Universal Serial Bus Controllers, you should see a device called STM device in DFU mode. Now if you don't see this, then the driver has not been loaded. Sometimes you'll see under unknown devices it might say digital radio in update mode or something else. In that case it may mean that the driver hasn't been loaded, or you just need to update it. Anyway, so try and do a driver update in Windows. If that fails and doesn't show this device, then I'm going to put a link in the description about where you can download the device driver from, and then that will give you the same device driver I'm using here, which is version 3.0.6.1, which is dated 2018. Other driver versions, older ones, I think there's a 2012 version which also works okay. I think that might be 3.04 anyway, but 3.061 works fine. Newer versions don't work. The manufacturer ST Microelectronics has totally changed the way their driver works in their newer driver, and it's not compatible with any older device, not just this radio, it's just any older device that uses has their own DFU upload system. So you need to make sure you're running the correct version of the driver. Also should be noted that it uses this driver, it doesn't use a COM port, so if you've got any COM ports listed, like this communication port 1, that's nothing to do with it. This radio in firmware update mode does not use a COM port like some of the cheaper older Baofangs like the UV5R, that uses a COM port. These radios use this STM device in DFU mode. So now the radio's ready to be updated and we know that the driver's installed and working okay, so we can move on to the next step. So you need to be running the OpenGD77 CPS program in order to upload the firmware into the radio. Now I've already installed that. I'm going to put a link in the description. In fact, I'll put a link to post on the OpenGD77 forum, which will have all the information about this, including where to download the CPS from and also where to download the actual files from. So I'm going to run the CPS now. Now if you haven't already got another OpenGD77 radio, then you're just going to end up with effectively a blank code plug, which is fine in here. That's not a problem. You can build your own code plug. If you've already got an OpenGD77 radio, you can just open that code plug, and a bit later on in this process, you can use that code plug directly in this radio. It's totally compatible with the code plugs from, say, a GD77 or MD9600 or MD or any of those other radios that are supported by OpenGD77. So it's a common code plug across all the radios, which can make life an awful lot easier if you've got multiple radios. Means you don't have to have different code plugs for each one. Anyway, so once you've run the OpenGD77 CPS, you need to select the radio type. Now the radio type's the one on the end of this list, so this list is all radios which basically have the same CPU in them, and at the end of the list it says MD2017 RT-82. Now the next step is on the extras menu. You need to go to the firmware loader and you need to pick the MD2017/RT-82 from the list of radios here, and that will tell it exactly which radio that you're uploading to. Don't pick any of the other ones because it won't work, because they use different encryption, or some of them use different encryption to this radio. Now, in order to use DMR on the radio, you're going to need to use a donor firmware, which we use because we can't include the DMR codec in the open firmware anyway. That's fully documented on the OpenGD77 website, etc. So if you've not already done this, you need to select the donor firmware. Now I've previously downloaded the donor firmware, the official donor firmware, which is actually, we always use the MD9600 firmware for all of these types of radios, regardless if it's a 9600 or a UV380 or even a DM1701. We use this firmware because they all use the same processor, they all use the same codec. So I've already downloaded that, unzipped it, and stuck it in a folder. So I'm going to select this now. Now once you select that, you'll see a message which says that the firmware has been verified and is correct. And when you do that, you will see over here that it says firmware loader plus DMR. So that means the DMR functionality is now going to be included. The next thing to do is to pick an additional language. If you speak one of the supported additional languages, you can pick one of these from the menu, and then that will be included as part of the firmware when it's uploaded to the radio. For the minute, just an example of this, I'm just going to pick French. I'm not going to use French, but I'll show you how that's selected when the radio first starts up with the OpenGD77 firmware. Next step is to pick the firmware. So the firmware that we need to use is this one here. So it's the OpenMD2017 firmware. Now I think this is, yeah, this version's fine. It's one I actually built yesterday, but it's exactly the same as today's version. So I'm going to pick this one, the OpenMD2017 zip file here. Hit open, and as soon as you hit open, it will start uploading to the radio. So first step of the process is to erase the program that's already in the radio, and then after it's finished erasing, it'll start writing the firmware to the radio, which you can see is quite a quick process. And then once it's finished, the radio should reboot. Okay, so the radio is now rebooted, and I'm going to switch back to the camera view so we can have a look at the radio. Okay, so the first thing that will be displayed will be settings updated. Now this is because the radio hasn't previously had any OpenGD77 settings data in it, because it's only had the official firmware. So this message tells you that the settings have effectively been initialized or updated. So at this point we just hit the menu button for OK, and then you get two languages in this case. Because I picked French, you can see that we can, on the display, we've got English or French. Now to change up, to move up or down The track, we're not currently using the trackball. In fact, a lot of people just don't like the trackball. We will eventually support it, but at the moment we're using the side buttons, so the up and down arrows are used on the side. Additionally, we use this blue button on the top as what's called the SK2 button, and some people call it the function button, and we use the orange button on the top of the radio, and we also use the push. There's actually a push button in the middle of the trackball, and we also use that as what's called button SK1. Anyway, so here we've got English and French. I'm just going to pick English and hit the menu key to accept, and there we are. The radio is now running the OpenGD77 firmware. Initially it's going to show frequency something like 144 megahertz. Now, I've previously had an OpenGD77 code plug on this radio before I reverted back to the official firmware, so there's going to be some bits and pieces in here that it remembers from when I was previously running OpenGD77 on it, but you won't see, say, APRS on it by default. I think it does say 144 megahertz, however. Pressing the menu button gets you into the menu, pushing up and down, etc. Takes you through all the menus as usual. These are exactly the same user interface as all the other OpenGD77 radios. This radio is basically most like an MD-UV380. Pressing back to the VFO. I can't remember if I've got any channels installed, but if you're installing from scratch you won't have any channels installed, so I'm not even going to bother going there at the moment. The next step is to go back to the CPS, so I'm just going to go back to I'm going to shrink this down and go back to the CPS, and what we need to do is to go into the OpenGD77 support menu. Hopefully this is coming out in video. It's looking slightly fuzzy on my display, but hopefully it's not looking too bad. So you go to the OpenGD77 support screen, and then you need to back up the flash and also back up the security registers. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate backing up the flash now because it takes too long. This takes 2 or 3 minutes to back up the 16 megabytes of flash. Once it's finished, it will prompt you to save the bin file to your hard drive, and now you need to save that in a safe location in case you want to totally restore the radio back to its original condition before you install the OpenGD77 firmware. If for some reason you forget to back up the flash, it's generally not a problem. You just need to upload an official code plug again after reinstalling the official firmware, but the radio should still be fine. The other thing that you should do is back up the registers. Now, the registers are a separate area in the memory in the radio which are read-only, so we don't change them, but they contain things like the calibration data and display type, lots of different things. Now I'm just going to quickly show you this because the backing up the registers takes a split second, and basically the saving process is pretty much the same as when you save to back up the flash. So there we go. So that's now downloaded the backup registers. Now I've already saved this a few times, as you can see here, so I'm just going to save over the top of this file I'd already saved before, MD2017 registers backup.bin. So I'm just going to hit save on that, and in my case it says you want to replace it, which I will do. Okay, so we've now got a full backup of the radio in case you want to revert it back to the way it was just prior to installing the OpenGD77 firmware. Now this isn't a backup of the official firmware, this is just a backup of all the other data that was in the radio. So it's the entirety of the 16 megabyte memory chip that's in the radio, and also this secure registers data, which is a separate part of the flash memory chip. Now once you've got that installed, the next thing to do would be to build a basic code plug if you don't already have an OpenGD77 code plug. So what I've got here, I think, is a totally blank code plug. Yeah, this is just a totally blank code plug. So I'm just going to enter my call sign in here. So VK3KYY. I'm going to put my DMR ID 5053238. Okay, so I've entered that information. Boot screen, I can put 3K, 3KYY, Roger, let's say, and that will go on the boot screen. And band limits, I'm not going to change. These are the total band limits. If you wanted to use user-programmed band limits, let's say you're in the UK, you could do say 144 to 146, or if you're in the States, you could do 144 to 148. These are just generic band limits for basically for the hardware in general, but you can use them to set the handband band limits. Now I'm just going to create a couple of channels just as an example. I'm just going to create a channel called FM 145 megahertz. Okay, so I'm going to do 145, FM, not digital, I want analog. Okay, so, and I'll set it to 25 kilohertz. Pretty much everything is standard, so that's one channel. Okay, so I'm going to close that away. Actually, yeah, I'm going to close that away, and I'm going to go and make another channel. Do digital, so I'll say DMR 145 megahertz. Again 145, 145. TG list. I've already got some stuff set actually, but I'll ignore that. It's from a previous code plug. So I'm just going to say TG list none color code 1 contact TG9. Okay, so this should transmit on 145 on DMR on talk group 9 time slot 1. Okay, so I've got a couple of channels defined there. I could also have a look at the VFO. So we've got one VFO analog on 145, and in fact the other VFO is analog on, digital on 145, but I could say make that analog on, say, 432 megahertz. So I'll just do that, make 432, 25 kilohertz. Okay, so now I'm going to save that as, say, yeah, that'll do. Just under my call sign and the date. So that's saved. To upload the code plug into the radio, there's a couple of different options. The first option is you can just go to these little symbols up here. So the symbol work with the red arrow going into the radio. Here that would write to the radio. The alternative option is to go to the extras, OpenGD77 support, and it's also got a write code plug option. So they do same thing basically. If you were to click this, it really just fires up this and clicks that button. So I'm going to do that now and write the code plug to the radio, and if you look on the screen you'll see the radio should tell you it's updating the code plug. So there we go. It doesn't take too long to write a code plug. Doesn't really matter really how big the code plug is, it always takes the same amount of space. Same amount of time to upload. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some DMR ID so it can display call signs correctly. So I'm going to go into the extras download call sign database. It also picks my region as 505, which is Australia. I'm now going to tell it to download that information from radioid.net. So I don't know how it's going to take a short while because there's about 150,000 or more DMR IDs in the database from radioid.net. So this is just purely the time it takes to download that database from that website. Now I need to process that database to just have the entries which are in region 505 for Australia, which is what it's doing now. So okay, so it's now got that, and you can see the information that's there. It's got the ID, it's got a call sign, and there's some details. So I think that kind of looks okay. Now these radios got a nice big display on them, quite a lot of space, so you can actually increase the number of characters for the call sign and details from the default of 16, say up to maybe 32 or beyond. And I'm just going to do maximum, say 50, and then it will put absolutely all this information into the radio. So once you've done all of that, you can hit write to radio. This will take a little bit longer, but it's not too bad for, say, quite a small area. I mean, there's only 4,000 DMR IDs it says it's uploading, so it shouldn't take too long to put that into the radio. Okay, so the radio's now been updated. It's on VFO. Oh, actually, it's something I haven't done with the code plug, so there we go, spot the deliberate mistake. In the zones, I've got a zone, but I've only got one of the two channels in it, so I need to put the other channel into it. Okay, there we go. Zone 1, that's okay for a name. Just save that and upload code plug again. Okay, so this time I'm going to hit the button up here, which does the same thing. Basically, it just opens up that screen and hits the right button. So here we go, upload the code plug again. Right, so at this point basically the radio is ready to go. You can see here I've got one channel, FM 145, and if I was to hit down it should say DMR 145 megahertz on talk group 9. So basically the radio now is fully functional. If I was to get another radio and transmit, say on DMR or FM, so here's my UV380. I'm just gonna, sorry, I'll just make this a bit bigger so you can see the radio. There we go, that's a bit better. So it's got the two channels, FM and DMR, both on 145. So I've got my my UV380 here also set to 145, so I'm just going to transmit VK3KYY testing. So as you can see, that's fine. It's showing my my name, callsign, etc. from the DMR ID database, which I've just loaded in. If you want to go to FM, well, in this case we could change channel, so I'll change channel. You can switch modes as well just by pushing a button on the keypad, which is what I'm going to do on this radio. So I'm just going to do FM now. Now at the moment FM is louder than DMR, so I'm just turning the volume down a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, VK3KYY FM test. Yep, so FM is also working. One additional feature I will quickly show is on the CPS. If you want to use satellite mode, you're going to need to download the current satellite prediction data, which is also known as KEPS data. So back in the CPS, what you can do is you can just open the OpenGD77 support screen and click install satellite KEPS. Now what that will do is it will download the KEPS data from Seller's track in this case, because that's the default, and get the amateur radio satellite data, and it will install that into the radio. So just going to push that button. So the first thing it's doing is downloading that from Seller's track, and then it's uploaded to the radio, and it shows you which satellites have been imported into the radio. Now going back to the radio, before you can use satellite mode, you need to set a couple of things. You need to set your location and the date and time. Now this radio does have GPS, so I can turn on the GPS in the options menu. However, because I'm indoors, it's not actually going to work immediately. In fact, it would take several minutes indoors to get a GPS position, so I'm just going to enter the position manually. Anyway, I've gone into the general options and I need to turn the GPS on. Now when it says GPS off, this means that the GPS has been detected but that it's turned off. By default, the firmware doesn't turn on the power to the GPS, because the GPS takes about 100 milliamps and it will flatten the battery pretty quickly, well within about 10, 12, 15 hours. It really increases the battery consumption. So by default GPS will be off, but if it says off, it means it's available. If it says none, that means the radio does not have a GPS, or the GPS is broken. So to turn the GPS on, use the P2 button. The P2 button basically causes all the menus to increase the value. So next from GPS being off is GPS on, and the next one would be NMEA, which is when we output the NME data to the USB, but we don't need that in this case, we just need the GPS to be on. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Then the next thing we're going to need to do is, in fact, if I just look at the GPS, it'll basically just say acquiring. Oh no, I've got one satellite, but it'll take quite a long time, so I'm not going to wait for that to acquire. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and set the position and time manually, which is in the radio info screen. So I'm going to go into the radio info screen. First thing on the radio info screen is the battery. Don't want that. Want to go down. Right, I need to set the time in UTC. So I think it must be about, it's just before 0 UTC actually. I think it's 23:57. So I'm going to enter 23:57 UTC. I think that's actually what it is. So I'm going to enter 23:57. I could be wrong at the moment, but I'm going to enter that as UTC. That's now entered. The other thing I'm going to need to do is enter the date. Now the date is correct. That's mainly because this radio's got a real-time clock in it. So if the date and time has been entered within the last about 6 weeks, even if the radio's been turned off, the real-time clock will kind of keep time and date pretty accurately, will time pretty accurately, and obviously the date should be correct following on from that. So it is the 26th, so that's correct, but the location is not set. So I'm going to set my approximate location. I'm actually fairly close to this location, but it's just easier if I do the approximate location. So 38, but I'm south of the equator, not north, so what I need to do is I need to press the down arrow to change that to south, and I'm close to 145 east. Now if you were west, what you actually have to do is hold the shift key, the SK2 key down, and then push the up or the down buttons to change the hemisphere from east to west, but I'm east, so that's fine. Right, so now it tells me straight away my locator, which is QF22MA, which is correct. So we now have the date and time and location set in, which it would get from the GPS if the GPS started working, but no, we still don't have any satellites because it's indoors and it doesn't pick up very well indoors. So let's go to the satellite menu, push that, and you can see it's now predicted when satellites are going to be coming over next. And I'm just going to go down and say pick one at random, say SO50. It's got a high power, 69 degrees. So yeah, so there's satellite mode. As far as we're aware, most functions work. We're not aware of anything in this that's in the OpenGD77 firmware that doesn't work. I've been told hotspot mode works. I've been told satellite mode has been people have told me they've used satellite mode and it's working. So as far as we're aware, everything with this is working like any other OpenGD77 compatible radio. The few things that kind of don't work in terms of the hardware of the radio is the trackball button. Now at the moment this just isn't being supported at all. We will support it in the future, but a lot of people have told me that they really don't like it, so because it's far too easy to bump into this little tiny trackball and for it to change channel, etc. So when we finally do support this, we will make that optional. The other thing that people have noticed is there's quite a pronounced click on the speaker. If I stop talking and turn the volume right down, don't know if you can actually hear that. So there's definitely a speaker click. Now I've checked and the speaker click happens in the official firmware as well, so this is just really an electronic design fault of the radio. The other thing we're not currently using is the soft volume. So the volume control is actually the volume control. It's a physical volume control we're using on that, and not like in the other radios, soft volume control. I don't know. Sorry, I've now turned it off. Anyway, at the moment I don't know whether we'll switch to using a soft volume control. I personally don't like soft volume because they tend to lag a little bit. And it doesn't seem, I can't see a particularly good reason for ham radio use for using a soft volume. For commercial users, I can see it because they kind of lock these things to stop the people using the radios from turning the volume down such that they can't hear people that are calling them. Anyway, so there's the installation and kind of quick run through of the OpenGD77 firmware running on the TYT MD2017.